Good evening, everybody. Tonight we're talking about an insider's guide to AP exams, how to improve scores and stand out for college admission. So this evening, we're going to discuss three specific things. Number one, what are the basics of the AP exams? What's important to know about these tests? The strategies for prioritizing, organizing, and studying effectively. And then lastly, the impact of taking the course and or getting a high score on college admission. So let's start out with those basics. So what is AP in the first place? Well, it stands for Advanced Placement. These are college level classes that students in high school have the opportunity to take. So this is college level material. These courses are written by the College Board, and you may also know the College Board from the PSAT and the SAT. It's the same company that makes the AP exams. There are actually 38 AP courses in 7 different subject categories. And there's a difference between the course and the test, but these are year-long courses, and the culminating event is the test. That is taken between May 1st and May 12th, depending on what class you take. And those scores are important. You can get between a 1, which is the lowest score, and a 5, which is the top score. A score of 3 is considered passing, and a score of 4 or 5 is really great. So why are these scores important? Why are they helpful? Here's the thing. When you take an AP class and you get a good score, the colleges see that you have mastered that material, and they may say, well, you did such a great job. You don't have to take this general education course in college. And ultimately, that can save you money on tuition. And sometimes it will enable you to graduate earlier. I was talking to a student just recently, and he's graduating, and he's a junior now, and he's graduating in December of next year. And he's thrilled because he's saddled by a lot of loans. And so this enables him to save money by graduating early, all because he took a number of AP courses in high school. You know, sometimes kids don't want to graduate early, but they want to have other opportunities in college. And that will enable them to maybe get a double major or a minor. They have more time for that. But also, good scores and high grades in these tests allow kids to really stand out on their application. It helps kids to get into the college of their choice. And there's nobody better to help us understand and sort through all this information than Kristen Landis. So Kristen, welcome. I'm glad you're here tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Kristen is a college consultant here with us at Educational Connections. She has her Bachelor of Science from University of Richmond, and she also has a law degree from Emory University in Atlanta. And for 11 years, Kristen, before coming to Educational Connections, Kristen worked at University of Virginia. There she was an evaluator, and she reviewed over 10,000 applications, both in-state in the state of Virginia, students from out of state, and international candidates. And Kristen, I'm so happy that you're here tonight because you can really lend insider advice on the impact of AP courses and getting good scores on admission. So let's start out with the basics first and talk about the benefits of taking an AP class.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, one of the main benefits of taking an AP class, just from a strictly learning perspective, is it provides students in high school with the opportunity to get a taste of what a college course is like. You know, in the little bit of a softer environment in high school, they can learn time management skills, study skills, and just see what the whole college experience is going to be like. They also have the opportunity to dig deeper into subjects that they're interested in. AP courses are considered more rigorous than honors or standard level. And so if, let's say, a student just loves history, they can take an AP government or an AP US history and really delve into that subject more. That gives them that opportunity. The other thing that AP courses do, that the same thing that standardized testing, the ACT and the SAT do, is they provide a barometer, like a standardization. So if students who go to, Yorktown versus going to McLean versus going to St. Albans, courses are taught differently. And so how does one gauge if a student really understands the material? An AP exam where everyone's taking the same exam can show that. So it's just another barometer that if a student does well on it, it's something that sets them a little bit different apart from the person sitting next to them. So that's one of the benefits. The other thing is, research shows that about 85% of college admissions officers look favorably on students taking AP exams. And when students go to college, there's AP exams or AP courses are that much more prevalent, that 3 out of 4 students who go to college now where AP courses are available have taken at least one. So it's really becoming almost the norm for students to take at least one AP course.
Kristen, it's interesting because, every day parents call our office looking for help for their kids. And sometimes they'll call like this time of year and they'll say, oh, I want an AP tutor to help my child prepare for the test. And one of our first questions is, how is he or she doing in the class? Because ultimately the grade in the class trumps the test score.
Absolutely. We've talked about it in numerous webinars and before that no matter what you do outside of the classroom or even the program rigor that you're taking, nothing is going to be more important than your actual grade performance in a class.
Yeah, and it's for that reason that, many times we'll, depending on the student's grade, we'll say, awesome, let's get him a tutor to make sure that he's studying for the exam appropriately and can get the very best grade he's capable of getting. Sometimes, however, if the grade isn't so great, we'll say, you know what, we can certainly study for the AP course, the AP test, but it's our recommendation to put the time and effort into actually increasing the grade in the class, because
Absolutely.
that's going to mean more for admission. So certainly there's a balancing act between the course and the score on the test. But many times parents will say, well, won't it look bad if my child takes a course, but maybe didn't get a good grade on the test and decides not to submit a score? How do you think about that, Kristen?
The answer to that has actually changed over the years. When I first started at UVA back in 2010, when you saw a student take an AP class and you didn't see an accompanying score, it kind of made you pause and go, I wonder why they didn't take the test. But with the pandemic, with this test optional landscape that we live in, standardized testing and scores in general have taken a little bit of a different turn. And so now when you see a student not submit a score, it doesn't have that same weight or stigma that it used to. It actually, if you submit a score, and we'll talk later what's considered a good score, but if you submit a score that's considered kind of lower, it's actually going to hurt you. So you're better off not submitting the score.
Remember one time on a past webinar, you said, as an evaluator, I couldn't unsee things.
That's right. You can't. Once you've seen them, and even though yes, very much so. So, with SAT and ACT in this test optional world that we live in, sometimes some people don't know this, but some high schools actually self-populate standardized test scores on transcripts. And if a student or a parent, they don't opt out of having those on the transcript, even though the student may have checked the test optional, you actually see the score. And yes, you can't factor it in, but as you said, Anne, you can't unsee what you've seen.
So let's talk about what is a good score. And then, Kristen, I'm wondering if you could also help us to understand how you help students determine whether, that score is good for a particular school in that subject and whether they should submit that score or not. So let's start out with, in general, what is a good score?
Sure. So as you said before, the scoring is from a 1 to a 5, 5 being the best that you can get. And so 3 is considered passing. So when I work with my students, what I recommend is that if you have a 4 or a 5, absolutely let's submit, because that's going to be a feather in your hat. It shows that you have a mastery of the subject. If you have a 3, it actually depends on which AP test you've taken. If it's one of the more rigorous ones, a BC Calculus and AP Chinese, something that's really considered more rigorous, then we may submit as well. It also depends on what schools you're applying to. A 4 or a 5 at a highly selective Ivy, UVA, MIT, those we're going to submit. For other schools, wonderful schools, a 3 is considered a good score, and so we may submit for those. So it just depends.
Take a look at the distribution of scores, because I find this so interesting. So we mentioned that a 1 is the lowest, a 5 is the highest. Let's take a look at 2 of the most common AP classes. Oh, and by the way, when we think of which classes do most students take, AP language is the most popular, and that's followed by US history and US psychology. And when we look at these scores, we can see in US history that 28% of kids are getting a 1 and 23% are getting a 2. So right off the bat, we know that half the kids are failing this exam. They're not doing well at all. And we see the same trend in AP Psych. However, it's easy to think like, oh, these are really, really hard classes. It's not that they're necessarily that difficult. It's that a lot of students take them. And many times, as Kristen, you mentioned, sometimes kids are kind of like dipping their foot in the water to take that college level class, but they may not be prepared. And they're certainly not prepared for the exam. And often they don't have the experience of studying material, a year's worth of material for a final exam. And so that's sometimes why we see these score distributions. But then compare that to Calculus BC, which is an extremely difficult class. And you look at the 4s and 5s and you see, wow, over 50% of kids are getting a 4 or a 5. And in fact, 5 is the most common score. Is it that this test is easy? No, it's that to get to this level of math, you really like math. You really have an affinity for math, and this is really your strength. And you're super motivated. So you're able to study over time for this exam. So just because the class is hard doesn't mean it has a low pass rate. So when we think of score distributions, Kristen, you talked about this already, but how should kids know if they should submit a score, and how do you help them with that too? Especially whether they've taken, an easier class that lots of kids take, like AP Psych. Many times kids will say that's the easiest AP class, or they've taken a more challenging class. What is the strategy behind that?
Well, I think, first of all, as I said, a 4 or 5 is that I definitely am going to submit regardless of what course it is. A 3 is something where we kind of talk about strategy. If it is one of those more rigorous APs, we may submit. And then also depending on what schools you apply to. And we have to differentiate for the audience, the difference between submitting for your college application and submitting after you've gotten into a school. I think sometimes people misunderstand that, is that once you've accepted to a school and you're going to matriculate to that school, then you can send your 3s, 4s, and 5s, because that's when, and they have to come directly from the College Board versus this self-reporting, which we're talking about doing on your college application. That's where you actually fulfill prerequisites, get credit for once you're in that school. And as you talked about before, and those things that, get you up farther along in the year, allow you to take a minor or a different major because you have more coursework. We're strictly talking about applying to college, and that's where you self-report. And so what people need to understand is you can pick and choose which you report and which you don't. So the 4s and the 5s, let's say hypothetically, we have a student who got a 4 on the AP Lang and a 5 on the AP Psych, but they got a 2 on the AP Calc AB. Well, we're going to submit the language and the Psych, and we're not going to submit the calculus. And that way, it's only pluses, only positives for the student, and not any red flags there.
Makes sense, Kristen. Let's pause for a moment and go to the Q&A because we had a lot of people in the beginning submit questions. So let me start out with Sarah's question. She said, if you're applying to a school with less than a 20% acceptance rates, which AP scores should be sent, 4s and 5s? So these would be very, very competitive schools. I think you've already answered that question. Yeah. Is there anything else that is important for these highly competitive schools?
As I said, the AP, just like in a test optional landscape, if you do very well in the ACT and the SAT, here is a high score on an AP exam. One more thing to show that the student is different from the person sitting next to him. It's just another benchmark barometer that a college can use to evaluate a student.
Thank you. Aryav says, how do we figure out the relative difficulty of AP courses? Is there a resource that tells us the distribution of 1 to 5s? And yes, on the College Board website, they have a section called AP Central, and you can go there and you can see the score distribution for every single class, or you can just Google score distribution AP and you can find it that way too. All right, Jenny asks, what is the weight of AP courses on admissions for various majors? So if you're majoring in, say, a STEM class, what are the APs that you should absolutely take versus maybe majoring in, say, political science?
So that's a good question. And it's twofold. So if you're a STEM student, and we've talked about this in other webinars about being too hyper-focused, being too linear in one area. So if you are a STEM-oriented student, definitely you want to see AB or BC calculus, the AP exam there. You want to see physics 1, 2, or physics C. You also want to see, depending if they're, biomedical engineering or chemical engineering, an AP bio or an AP chem. However, I don't want people to discount the fact that we do want to see students be a little bit more well-rounded as well. So if you're applying to those highly selective schools, I would want to see AP classes in most cores, in English, in history, in foreign language, possibly, depending on the schools you're applying to. So you just don't want to discount other subjects just because your student is more STEM oriented or more humanities oriented. I think people should really focus on the core, the 4 core, and then foreign language, also depending on what schools you're applying to. I know at UVA, AP language, AP English language, AP literature, extremely important.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep.
A couple of people asked specific questions about their child, so I'll email you about those. But there was one about, and this is a growing trend that we've seen, where schools do not have AP classes. It's not that they don't want to offer them, but they have in the past and they decided not to in the future. Some of the very competitive private schools do not have AP classes. Have you had the situation where a student didn't actually take the class, Kristen, but still wants to sit for the exam?
Yes, definitely. I mean, there are students who've decided they're going to self-study or come to EC tutoring and get prepped for an AP exam and take the exam just to show that they have the mastery of the subject. But just so people understand, you cannot be penalized for not taking classes that are not offered at your school. So when in college admissions, you're looking at the rigor of the courses that are offered at the school that your student goes to. And if they don't offer AP exams, if they only offer dual enrollment, which is a collaboration between the high school and the local community college, or maybe they just have honors classes, or maybe they don't have anything. Maybe they just have it's what we won't call standard, but just one level. You cannot be penalized for not taking classes that don't exist at your school.
Thank you so much for that, Kristen. So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the studying process and how to help kids get the best grade that they possibly can. And the first question we often get from parents is, how far out should my teen begin studying? And because we know tests are the first 2 weeks of May, it really should be about now or as soon as possible. And the reason is there's a lot of material to cover Plus, kids are still learning new material. So you have to give it time. Really planning out the study process is based on this concept called distributed practice, which is very well versed in research. And we know that in order to do well on a cumulative test, your brain needs time to learn information, work on it, and then sleep on it, and then learn some more the next day. So it's called distributed practice. It's also called spaced practice because you're doing it over time. Practicing in short bursts instead of all at one time. We know that when kids prepare it, at the last minute for AP courses, AP tests, it does not do well. They do not do well. They need to have time and to practice, sleep on it, and learn some more. So here's an example of a study plan for AP World History. And I did this over 8 sessions because this is what we offer for our students. We offer an 8-session plan. Typically, it's once a week, but sometimes kids don't have enough time and we'll work with them twice a week. And so we'll figure out, all right, what is the content that you need to know? Let's break this up into 8 sections. And then what are we going to do to help you study, for example, the structure of the AP World History exam? How is that going to work? And so we map it out for the students so they can see exactly what we're going to be working on. I had this situation with my youngest son, who's now in college. But when he was in high school, he was a good student, but he was really apprehensive about college level work. But kind of like Kristen said, he wanted to try an AP class. And so he decided to take AP government because he thought, I might major in political science, but I'm not sure. Let me just take this class. And he took AP Gov and he liked it. He was motivated to do well in the class. He enjoyed it and he wanted to do a good job on the test. And his teacher would assign these things for the kids to do outside of class to study for the exam. And although he wanted to get a good grade on the test, he really didn't do much of it. He really focused on his grade and just getting the homework done that he had to do, not the kind of nice to haves of studying. And so as he got closer to the test, we were talking about, and he said, I really think I would benefit from a tutor who can make sure that I get this done and can explain all of this to me. And so he set up, started working with a tutor who broke things down into 8 sessions. And in the first session, he gave him a baseline assessment to determine what might his score be. And he got a 2. And he was really upset over that he had a 2. And so they practice. And then on the final exam, he got a 4, which he was thrilled with. And he submitted that to college. So to all the colleges that he applied to. So breaking things up over time is really the way to go. And ideally, you're using College Board materials. The College Board is super transparent about what is on these tests. And as I mentioned, on the College Board website, they have a tab called AP Central. And on that tab, you can see for each class, all right, this is the content, and this is how it's going to be structured. And here are some things that you can do to practice. But it kind of leaves it up to the student. And although some teachers will provide materials for kids, they're really left on their own to do much of this work independently. And so for that reason, having a little bit of help outside to provide accountability and keep kids on track is ideal. And part of that is making sure kids know the exam structure for each test. On some tests, actually on most tests, there's a multiple choice section. There's a free response section. And on some of the language-based and the history classes, there's a DBQ, which is a document-based question, where students are given a prompt and they have to support their answer with data. And keep in mind, these are hard tests. They're about 2 or 3 hours long, depending on the subject. And the scoring guidelines really vary by test. So part of what we do is getting kids to understand, okay, you're in AP Gov, or, you're in AP Lang. This is the format of the test. So this is how we're going to practice. As an example, I mentioned DBQs, database questions. There's a scoring rubric that the College Board gives to kids. Here's an example of a prompt. Evaluate the extent to which economic growth led to changes in the United States society in the period from 1940 to 1970. That's extremely hard to put all your thoughts and organize them and to give the answer that the reader wants, because there's a real person on the other side that reads every student's answer. And they're graded based on this rubric. So this is how it's broken out. You can get up to a point for your thesis, a point for contextualization, your evidence, which is the most important, is up to 3 points. And then the analysis behind it is up to 2 points. So you can see how kids can earn their score. So all of this being said, there are changes coming up. And for many, many years, kids have done exams in written form. But now, this May, the College Board is rolling out new tests in certain subjects that can be taken digitally. And it's actually a school-based decision as to whether the school will offer the digital format or the paper and pencil format. So if you're not sure and your child isn't sure, they can ask the teacher in their school, will you be offering this class digitally or is it pencil and paper? Ultimately, kids, need to be prepared. And when kids are prepared and they're feeling good about the content, they're going to score to the best of their ability because they're feeling really, really confident on test day. Kristen, I want to go back to questions in just a second as we wrap up. But I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about APs and course selection and some students that you've worked with and what you've seen over the years.
Sure, absolutely. So right now we're in the throes of working with students on their course selections for next year. And as we said before, there are 3 components to the college application. 2 of them are things we're talking about tonight. One is program rigor. How hard are the classes your student is taking that your high school provides. And the second thing is your grades, your performance in those classes. Now, this is all looking through a college admissions lens. I think one of the philosophies we have definitely is that, high school is a time of exploration. It's a time for students to dabble into different subjects that interest them, to explore. So you have to take into account that balance that you showed earlier, Anne, that yes, you want to take the hardest classes you can, but you also have to know your student. If they're a little ambivalent, or if they have only a certain amount of time that they study because they have other outside commitments, really understanding where they can set their time with APs. Maybe they take just one AP in a subject that they're interested in. I have a student who's a musician and just loves composing music. That's what they want to do with their later in their career. So they're taking AP music theory, something that they're very, very interested in. Maybe your student is really into computer science. So they take AP computer science and AP computer science principles. Highly, highly selective schools, yes, it does. They do want to see APs and all the cores and other, it is the numbers that you're taking, the how hard your program is, the rigor of your program, but you have to know your student. Taking 1 or 2 or 3 is all, if that's where they feel comfortable and it's in the areas that they're interested in, then you need to listen to your student and go with that. This is where your guidance counselor can help you. This is where we at EC can help you as well. And in the course selection process, you also have to understand that AP courses, more times than not, need teacher approval, or you have to have taken a prerequisite to take that class. So the earlier, starting in 9th grade or even in 8th grade sometimes, setting yourself up so that you can take those AP classes as you get into the later years in high school is really important, because you don't want to be in a position where your student, they really want to take BC calculus and they're sitting in pre-calc in 11th grade, and that's just not going to happen for them. So it's really important to course map, plan out the 4 years as best you can, listen to your student, what they're interested in, areas of study that they'd like to delve deeper into, and then balance the program. Make sure that you want rigor, but you also want to do well in those classes that you're taking.
Thank you for that, Kristen.
Yep.
That makes me think of a question that parents often ask, and nobody's asked it tonight, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. And the question is it better to get an A in a regular or an honors class, or a B in an AP class?
As with everything in college admissions, I'm going to say it depends. It depends, first of all, the kind of schools that your student is looking at. And it also depends what classes we're talking about, and also their area of interest. If you have a student who is, as we said, really they're applying to engineering school, then you're going to want to see the AP class in BC Calc or AB Calc physics. And if they have a B in it, they have a B in it, but they've taken the class. If they haven't taken the class, that can, hurt them as well. More times than not, having your grades, what grade you get in a class is more important than taking the rigor. But there are certain instances, depending if it's specifically focused in certain areas in the schools that you're looking at, that I would recommend the AP, even if you are going to get a B. It just depends.
I knew you were going to say this.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And we're happy to help you with any, all the AP classes that your kids are taking. These are the ones that we prepare kids for. You can see the list here, from the world history, U.S. history, to the math and science courses, as well as the English courses. And if we can help your student with an 8-session program, hold up your phone, scan this code. It will take you right to our calendar, and you can talk to either Kathy, Jennifer, or Ann Stewart about your child's needs. We'll share information with you on our program, and we can see if it's a match. And if Kristen is what you need, if you need a college planner, she helps students starting in 8th grade all the way. I know you're still finishing up with some seniors now, but really thinking about next year would be with juniors. Kristen is happy to help you too. And we have different kinds of programs that really meet the needs of every kind of family and every age level. And you can talk to Erin Ebert about Kristen, and Erin has worked with us for almost 13 years. She knows our college programs well, and she can share with you information on our program. So here's Erin's contact information, and you can also get on her calendar. All this information is on our website, which is ectutoring.com, and there's a tab at the top called College. So Kristen, before we go to Q&A, once again, I want to thank you so much for lending your expertise this evening.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. All right, so we have some questions. One is from a parent who said, her son got, I have two of the opposite questions. Son got a 4 on an AP, but his grade was a C. Have you ever seen something like that, where usually it's the opposite, but where the score on the exam is higher than the grade?
Definitely seen that. And this is an example of where I would recommend that the student use on the Common Application, which most universities take. There is an additional information section, and that is where I would want the student to explain why do we have the disconnect between the score and the grade. Sometimes the student just doesn't jive with the teacher. Maybe there's an extenuating circumstances with regards to the class. Maybe they had a long time substitute or something of that nature, but I would definitely want an explanation, because I'm going to look at that and go, what happened?
For sure. And then another parent said that her child got a 3 on the test, but an A in the class. And we see that more often. Have you seen that as well? Oh,
absolutely. Absolutely. And a 3, I mean, I know we're talking a lot about 4s and 5s this evening, but a 3 is still considered passing. And, Anne showed you the percentage of acceptance rates, and a lot of people are in the 1s and 2s. So a 3 is still something that is not something to be ashamed of.
Becky said, we talked about that the school doesn't offer AP classes. Let's see. I thought there was something else. Maybe that was it. I thought there was another question. Melissa, do you see it here? I guess. Okay, I thought I saw something come through, but now I don't see it. All right, so Kristen, I think that's all the questions that we have this evening. Any final thoughts before we close out?
Well, I think the one thing that we always say at the end of these, I know tonight we were focusing mainly on AP exams and such, but with regards to college in general, I really think that parents really need to listen to their students. There is a college for everyone. There's 2,000 schools out there in the United States, and if you go into the world, even more. And you're really trying to find the school that matches your student and also is a fit for your student. And where a student goes to college, it doesn't define how successful or how happy they're going to be in life. And also college experience is really what you make of it. All the schools have wonderful facilities, wonderful professors, lots of opportunities, and it's really what the student makes of it. So I want students to be able to enjoy their high school years, not stress out as much as so many do because of this whole college admissions process. And it is laborious and daunting, but we're here to help you through it if need be. And just know that there is a school for everybody.
Thank you for that, Kristen. Okay,
Sure.
So can I ask you one more question before you go? Mark just said, how many tests can a student realistically take in 12 days in May? And then I thought I saw another question where a parent said the school wants a student to take 5 AP classes. So can you talk a little bit about really overload of classes? I think that's what both of these parents are asking.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not unusual to see students with 5 and 6 APs in a year, and high schools are very well versed at that, and so they'll come out with the exam schedule. It's usually 2 exams a day, and if a student has an overlap of, let's say they're taking Calc AB and they're also taking English literature, and both of them are at the same time on Wednesday, the school will work with the student to offer it another alternative time, because the AP exams are only offered once a year in that May timeframe. So they will work with the student in order for them to get all those in if they are a student who ends up taking 5 or 6 APs in a year.
Another parent asked about a retake. Can you retake an AP exam? I have not heard of that. Have you?
You can retake them. I don't necessarily recommend it. I think that, as Anne talked about earlier, time is best well spent concentrating on grades. And AP exams, they can help a student, definitely. But if you have a poor score, I would pretty much move on at that point, and not go through the process of retaking. But there is the option to retake, and then that score does usurp that earlier score.
And one parent asked, have you ever seen a student with 2 Bs get into an Ivy League school?
There is no exact science to college admissions. I've said this many, many times to parents and to students. So I would never say there's never for anything. There's a lot that goes into evaluating an applicant and deciding whether they're going to be offered a space for in the class or not. So I would not say never. Would I say that 2 Bs at an Ivy League school would leave a student in a challenging situation? Probably.
Thank you. Awesome. And then Becky, our last question, Becky asks, what does a 5 in physics, calculus, and statistics equal numerically? I'm not sure what she means by that. Do you know what that means, Kristen?
Numerically, as in like if it's 100% or a 90% or an 80%?
Oh, maybe that's what it is.
I think that's probably what she means. And yes, that's what she means. And I don't know what that would equate to.
I'm not sure either. But Becky, feel free to email me and I can find the answer for you. My email is ann@ectutoring.com. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here tonight. We so appreciate it. It was wonderful to have you on this evening. If we could be of help, please feel free to reach out. I wish you all the best for the remainder of the school year. Have a great evening and bye-bye.
Bye.